Hi and welcome to CITAM Church Online, this being the Youth Cafe. My name is Patrick Kuchio, the Head of Missions at Christ is the Answer Ministries. We continue our conversation on the power of asking, leveraging the power of this three-letter word, ASK, ask, ask. Now we will study a very interesting congregation that leveraged the power of asking. Now, the early church, as recorded in the book of Acts, is a congregation that leveraged the power of asking. Not just once, but on several occasions. They had watched Jesus praying early in the morning. They had watched him praying late in the evening. They had experienced answers to prayer. So they knew how to unlock the supernatural by leveraging the power of this three-letter word, ask. And so I draw your attention to the book of Acts chapter 12. A very interesting story where the Bible tells us it was about this time that King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with a sword. When he saw that this pleased the Jews, he proceeded to seize Peter also. This happened during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. After arresting him, he put him in prison, handing him over to be guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each, 16 soldiers. Herod intended to bring him out for public trial after the Passover. So Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying, was earnestly asking God to intervene. Here is a congregation that refused to cow to the power of persecution. Here are people who refuse to be stopped by the religious order of the day. They said, we will leverage on the power of asking. It didn't matter what they were facing. They said, we will leverage the power of asking. One of them, James, has been killed by the sword. And when King Herod saw that this pleased the Jews, he goes ahead and actually arrests the team leader, Peter. Now, this kind of arrest was not a joke. He actually intended to bring him out for public trial after the Passover. So he has Peter locked up. And your guess is as good as mine. There is no way Peter was going to wriggle out of this particular case. But what I find very interesting is that the church decided to engage heaven by asking. You know, Herod makes it completely impossible for Peter to escape from prison. Why? He commits him to 16 soldiers, 4 squads of 4 soldiers each, 16 soldiers to guard 1 man. Now, in that time and age, a criminal, a serious criminal, was chained to 2 soldiers. That was a serious criminal, but here is Peter. Having not committed any crime, he is chained to 16 soldiers. Herod was sure that it was going to be impossible for Peter to escape. Now, next time you are up against an impossible situation, please remember this truth, that you are a candidate for the supernatural intervention of God. Next time you find yourself up against an impossible situation, don't be intimidated, don't cow to it, don't fear, don't surrender. Remember this, once you find yourself in an impossible situation, it makes you a candidate for the supernatural move of God. And the church knew that this was a situation that had set them up for the supernatural move of God. And they got down on their knees to ask. And you know, God is amazing. When you and I engage and leverage on the power of this 3-letter word, ask, and asking with the right motives, He moves on our behalf. He moves on our behalf. The Bible says the night before Herod was to bring him to trial, verse 6 of Acts chapter 12, Peter was sleeping between two soldiers, bound with two chains, and sentries stood guard at the entrance. I find it interesting that on the eve of his execution, I would imagine that Peter would be all anxious and panicky, but he was cool, calm, and collected. He was sleeping. Now, Peter is a very interesting gentleman. You find him sleeping at the wrong time. You find him sleeping in the Garden of Gethsemane when Jesus needed him to be up, interceding for him and with him. He fell asleep. And Jesus comes to him and his other colleagues, James and John, and asks them, couldn't you pray with me for just 1 hour? You find him sleeping at the wrong time. You find him also sleeping at the Mount of Transfiguration. When Jesus was transfigured and his clothes were bright and white, Peter is sleeping, and you're like, Peter, how do you go sleeping at the revelation of God's glory? This is the time to be so reflective and engaging. But you find Peter sleeping. And in Acts chapter 12, on the eve of his execution, you find Peter asleep as well. So I asked myself, what was it with Peter? Peter knew the power of this three-letter word. He had asked, and he knew that God was going to come through. I will show you now a few minutes how I am convinced that Peter had sorted out the asking story. Anyway, the church is asking God and they're engaging God, and God decides to send an answer. Verse number 7, the Bible tells us of Acts chapter 12. Suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared, and a light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him up. Quick, get up, he said, and the chains fell off Peter's wrists. When you and I engage God earnestly, when you and I leverage on the power of this three-letter word, ask, earnestly, when you and I engage the heavens fervently, the heavens respond. How did heaven respond to the church's leveraging on the power of asking? The first thing that happened was that God dispatched some divine dignitary. Simply put, an angel. Angels are divine dignitaries. In response to the asking of the early church, God dispatches a divine dignitary. You see, angels are assigned to serve we who are beneficiaries or inheritors of salvation. They're assigned to minister to us. And God sends a divine dignitary. Remember, Herod has made it completely impossible for Peter to escape because he has chained him to 16 soldiers. But you and I know that God is not limited to the ways of man. He bypassed every protocol that had been put in place in this prison and sends an angel who was not limited to time, space, to program, to protocol. He bypassed all that. Why? Because the church was leveraging on the power of asking. I pray that God will send you angelic visitations as you engage the heavens in prayer. As you ask Him, may He send you angelic help. Secondly, the Bible tells us in Acts chapter 12 verse 7, a light shone in the cell. God does not just dispatch divine dignitaries. He dispels darkness in answer to you and I leveraging the power of asking. There is a lot of darkness that has pervaded and is pervading our world. Not just our physical world and the systems of this world, but also minds. There's a battle for the minds. And there's a lot of darkness that is being celebrated as light. But when you and I engage and the power of this three-letter word, God will send us light. You see, He is the light of the world. And you and I need His light in the morning, in the noontime, in the evening, in the night. We need His light through and through to illuminate our minds, our situations, our path. We need the light of God. As the early church was engaging The power of asking, as they were engaging heaven, as they were praying, God didn't just dispatch a divine dignitary. He dispelled the very light. It suggests that there was some darkness in that cell. When the light shone, this was not just the light from a service provider. This was the light from heaven. There is something about the light from heaven when it shines on a man and when it shines on a woman. There is something about the light from heaven when it shines on a situation, when it shines on a family, when it shines on your issue. Something must happen. Darkness must be dispelled. When God's light shines on your issue, darkness must be dispelled. You see, at the very beginning, in Genesis chapter 2, the earth was void, it was formless, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. And God said, let there be light. His light came by and darkness was dispelled. You and I need to ask God again and again to send us light. But thirdly, God didn't just dispatch divine dignitaries. He didn't just dispel the darkness. He dismantled or destroyed demonic defenses. The Bible tells me Peter's chains fell off his wrists. Those that had bound him, those that had kept him in a hopeless situation, when God sent the divine dignitary, when he caused his light to shine, and the angel struck him on the side and woke him up, the chains fell off. There are many situations that have kept us bound in fear, in sin, in lack, in oppression, that require a divine intervention. But God is waiting on you and I to leverage on the power of asking, because when we ask, He will dispatch a divine dignitary, an angel, angelic help. He will also dispel darkness, but He will also destroy demonic defenses. Are you up against some unexplained situations? When you try to understand what you're up against, you're not too sure what you're up against, and you can only say, this is demonic. Don't be intimidated. Whether it is demonic, whether it is diabolical, God specializes in breaking chains. But He is waiting on you and I to turn to Him as we leverage on the power of asking. And Peter was freed. But what is interesting as I close, Peter goes all the way to where the church was gathered asking. They were gathered engaging the heavens. When he knocked at the door of the house where they were gathered, a lady called Rhoda, a servant girl, came to answer the door. The Bible says when she heard Peter's voice, she was excited and ran back to the prayer meeting and told them, guys, stop asking. God has sent an answer to our asking. This thing works. The people at the prayer meeting told her, you are out of your mind. You are out of your mind. I know that Peter had asked because he was full of expectation. Unfortunately, the church that was asking were not expecting. So this is a twist in this conversation. That when you ask God, please expect Him to answer. Because when you leverage on the power of asking, God is serious about you and I engaging Him. When we engage Him with the right motives, when we engage Him in faith, He always comes through. So when you ask, please expect. Because it is only expectation that brings forth answers and life. Once again, my name is Patrick Kuchio. This is CITAM Church Online, this being the Youth Cafe. We continue with this conversation on asking. Please feel free to engage us, send us questions, keep this conversation going on our social media platforms, on our YouTube channel. Please subscribe. Please engage us on Instagram, engage us on Facebook. We have a Facebook page. Please engage us on Twitter. We are happy to engage with you as we continue this conversation about asking.